Hi, everybody, and welcome to another part of your Metabolic Dietary Solutions program. I'm Michal, functional nutritionist here at Better Medical in Calgary, Alberta, and I am, as usual, joined by my partner in good crime, Dr. Shabnam Das-Kar, functional medicine doctor and medical director of Better Medical Center, both here in Calgary, Alberta, as well as in India. Welcome, Dr. Carr. It's nice to chat with you again.
Thank you, Michal. It's always my pleasure to talk to you. So what are we talking about today?
So today we are going to go over something that is very relevant in all cuisines, but I think very specifically in Indian cuisine, and that is cooking oils and cooking fats.
Okay.
And although I know a lot about cooking oils and cooking fats, and I hope as a prerequisite to watching this video, you've all watched the video that we did, the previous video on fats, so that you understand what I'm talking about when we talk about saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated fats. And as I said, I know a lot about that. What I didn't know was specifically how these fats played out in Indian cuisine. Having never lived in India, I've eaten Indian food, obviously, wherever I've traveled and been, but I know that when you live in a country, what becomes available to you can be quite different. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Carr to go through the oils that are predominantly used there, and then we'll discuss those in more detail.
Okay, so I'm going to use a PowerPoint to just briefly describe some of the oils. Okay, here we are. Okay, 1 minute. I'm just getting Okay, so now in India, Michal, as you're probably aware, it has happened all over the world, that in India, people have moved away from using the traditional oils. And as you can see in this list, the traditional oil was coconut oil, sesame oil, mustard oil, ghee, groundnut oil. Now, these were the common oils used maybe 50, 60 years ago. So that was the traditional kind of traditional oil that was used in Indian cooking. Now, when you visit India, you'll realize India is a very diverse country. So it depends on which part of the country you are in. Like coconut oil is very common in the coastal areas. And again, it's of course, a question of availability. Mustard oil is more common in eastern India and northern India. So sesame oil was common in sesame oil and groundnut oil more in some of it in the southern part of the country, some of it in the western part. So it would depend on which part of the country people are from and what was the type of oil they would be using. However, a lot of things have changed over the last several years, and a lot of the oils which you discussed in the last video and you'll discuss at greater length today have been in use now. Things like rice bran oil, palmolive oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, vanaspati, which is actually the most dangerous oil we could ever have, soybean oil, canola oil, grapeseed oil, and olive oil. Now, some of these oils, Michal, believe it or not, come with, the containers would come with a heart healthy logo on them.
Right.
And it's very sad that it is so deceptive, because none of these oils, and I'm not mentioning the particular names, but those of you who use it, you will know which ones I'm talking about. They are not really heart healthy. So, Michal, will you just go over a little bit about what we discussed about the trans fats in oil and why that is such a big concern for me, for my people in India, for my audience in India?
Okay, I wanted to quickly just go through and just touch on why that heart healthy stamp exists. Unfortunately, it does stem from some very outdated theories on what causes heart disease. And as we discussed last time, it was once surmised that saturated fat caused heart disease and polyunsaturated fats were heart healthy. So you will often see a heart healthy stamp still on many of the polyunsaturated fats. And what we have learned since then is it's not the saturation or the polyunsaturation of the fat that makes a difference, but the processing and the type of manufacturing that has gone into making that oil that makes it heart healthy or not. And Dr. Carr, you had mentioned that Vanaspati is one of the worst oils that you can consume. And I think it's overtly one of the worst oils that you can consume, because we know that it has been partially hydrogenated, that some of its stability comes from man manipulating the fat and making it more stable. And the manipulation of the molecule is what the molecule that forms from that manipulation is very toxic to the human body. And those are really easy to spot because they'll often say partially hydrogenated or hydrogenated on them. There will also be polyunsaturated oils that are solid or semi-solid. Think of something like a margarine, which I'm sure you guys have something. Is there something like that in India nowadays?
I am not sure, but right now, but I know back in the days when we still believed in the diet heart hypothesis. Right. That was when people were asked to go off the butter and start using margarine, and that was all over the world, not just in India.
Exactly. Now, the problem is that with many of the man-made oils, which means oils that come from plants or from natural things that are not oily in their natural state. So there's a lot of processing that goes into removing the oil from them. And it doesn't matter if that oil comes out predominantly saturated, monounsaturated, or polyunsaturated. The processing itself destroys or manipulates many of those molecules. And there are trans fats or hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated molecules in all man-made oils, in all processed or in all industrial crop oils. So many of the oils that are really inexpensive, that are mass-produced, they often don't have a smell to them, and they are sold in big plastic, often clear containers, are often highly, highly, highly toxic, whether they have a heart healthy stamp on them or not, whether they say the words hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated on them or not. Does this make sense?
Yes, it does. And it's very interesting, Mikhail. So what are trans fats basically? You talked about them the last time as well. So trans fats are the bad fats, and these are not the fats we ever want you to take. So ideally, Mikhail, what would you say should be the minimum amount of trans fats in your food? I know what you're going to say.
The minimum amount of trans, or the maximum amount of trans fat that you can ever consume is 0.
0. Okay, so why are trans fats so bad?
They are that toxic to you. The body does not know what to do with these fats. They tend to get through the gut barrier, so they get into our bloodstream. They are very sticky and they are very unstable. So they stick to the walls of our arteries, and they also are highly oxidized, being unstable. If you watch the last video, you'll understand that they have a lot of oxygen bonds on them. And oxygen, although it keeps us alive, we also know that it creates a lot of devastation on the planet. If you think of rust is a result of oxidation. And when these trans fats stick in our arteries and in our organs, they literally cause oxidation, which means we start to rust for all intents and purposes from the inside out. So you do not want one of these molecules in your body, because that can start a little bit of a snowball effect from this oxidation, this rust perspective. And you've all heard about taking antioxidants or eating antioxidants. And one of the reasons that we do that is to take care of the natural oxidation that takes place in our body every day. It's just part of living and aging and being alive. We don't want to exacerbate that problem. We don't want to make it worse. And trans fats definitely do that. And one of the problems with the original diet heart hypothesis was that, and we discussed this last time, was that all saturated fats were lumped together, and there was no differentiation made between the man-made saturated fats or the trans fats, or the fancier term, because we all know trans fats are bad, but the fancier term now is hydrogenated fats or partially hydrogenated fats or interesterified fats. No differentiation was made between those and the naturally occurring solid fats in nature. In Indian cooking, those would be the ghee and the traditional cooking oils of ghee and coconut oil.
Yeah, and surprisingly, actually, even I didn't know this. Now, this was an article I came across. So this is the trans fat content in oils and fats in India. So you can see that, the lightest shade is what it should be. And it is Denmark, because Denmark was one of the first countries in the world way back in 2004, which banned trans fats. And in 2016, they did a study to see whether it made any difference to the incidence of heart disease. And it turns out it did. And Denmark is a country which already has very advanced healthcare. So going back to the Indian scenario, so this is, and you can see that without even understanding a lot of the statistics and all of it, that all these big ones are the really bad ones. So the minimum and maximum trans fats in any of these branded oils. Now you can see the non-branded butter was very high in trans fats. Even the branded butter, I mean, you would think that butter wouldn't contain trans fats, right? And non-branded butter oil was also very high. So you can see from this, graph that all these are the really bad ones. And most of these, the oils and fats used in India contained a very high percentage of trans fatty acids. Now, the FSSAI is the government regulation. So this is an article from 2012. So back then, FSSAI in India had said the maximum amount of trans fats should be 10%, 10 grams, I think they had said, yeah. Now that has been reduced to 5%, sorry, not grams, 10% back then. To 2017, it's down to 5%. Now, Michal, is that good enough?
It is not. And here in North America, a lot of companies pride themselves on saying 0 trans fats on the front of the label of a product, because they know that as a society we are getting more educated, and trans fats are literally killing us. However, the government regulations has allowed some loopholes, I guess, in that statement, and you are allowed to say 0 trans fats as long as there is less than 0.5 grams of trans fats per serving in the product. Now, remember that I said the maximum that you should have is 0.
Yeah.
0.5 grams is way more than 0. It might not seem like a lot, but you do not want 1 molecule of the stuff in your body. So one of the things that food companies do is they reduce the portion size. So
yeah, I know.
It looks like there's 0 trans fats. So more than anything else, it is unbelievably important for us as consumers to take responsibility for the food that we are eating and not just believe blindly what we see on the front of a label. So reading the ingredient list is unbelievably important. You will notice that even butter has ingredients. And the reason that it has ingredients is because it's not all pure 100% butter. Look at your ingredients. If the words hydrogenated, partially hydrogenated, or interesterified is anywhere on that ingredient list, it is the one thing that you can do to avoid that product like the plague. Really, and I may sound like I'm being alarmist, but I've watched people turn their health around solely by changing the types of fats that they're eating.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Mikhail. And another, just an aside, I think in India, as far as I know, and I may be wrong, they don't need to list all the ingredients in great detail. But again, if it's the topmost ingredient is, let us say, wheat, then that means that is the maximum amount in it. So for those of you listening to us from India, where do most of your trans fats come from? Now, Mikhail, I don't know whether you're aware of this. In India, people love having cookies. In India, we call them biscuits with their tea.
Yes, I call them biscuits too. I'm from South Africa, so I come from a British colony as well.
So the biscuits with the tea that many of you probably enjoying around 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the evening is full of trans fats. Then the other major source of trans fats in India is that when you eat food from, let us say, one of those push carts or something like that, just around the corner, they can use the same oil many, many times. Why is that? Because, okay, it's way cheaper to use the same oil, but the amount of trans fats that would give you is like a super, super high dose. And obviously the fellow who's, preparing food in the push cart is not going to use the most expensive coconut oil or ghee. He or she is going to use vanaspati, right? So these are the challenges. And again, why should you wait for the government to take all the measures and everything? And this is what I say, I control what goes into my mouth. So I'm the one who controls how much trans fats I eat. And this is the reason I am so much in favor of eating at home. And I know some people think I'm a wet blanket, but I'd much rather be a wet blanket than die early.
I agree with you. And it's the same piece of advice the world over. Trans fats are used because they're cheap and because they're stable. They allow food to last on the shelf longer. The way that we generally tell if a fat has gone rancid or off or stale is by its smell. And all man-made fats have had their smell removed. So our ability to even tell if the fat is rancid is removed. So it allows a food manufacturer to put more wheat and more sugar into a product to keep it on a shelf in a package longer. We all know that a bag of biscuits can last in the shops for months and months and months and months. The ones you make at home do not.
Yeah.
Part of that is because of the fats. And restaurants and fast food chains or food carts will use these fats, again, because they're cheap and because they can heat them to a really, really high point without them catching on fire and without them smelling bad. And they can use them over and over again. And remember, polyunsaturated fats, which all of these fats are very unstable. And the more they break down, the more trans fats are created. And what breaks these things down? Light and heat.
Okay. So again, this is just from Denmark to Delhi, the multi-sectorial challenge of regulating trans fat in India. And like I said, why do you want to wait for the government to regulate everything for you? You can regulate what goes into your mouth, right? So Mikhail, one more question that I'm asked quite often is, does the smoke point of oil have any meaning at all when we are choosing a particular oil for cooking?
It does and it doesn't. And if I may share a document that I have, would you be all right with that?
Yes, for sure. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Oh, then I'm going to share mine, because what you can see here, I don't know how to do it on my new computer.
At the bottom of your screen, do you see a screen share?
Yeah, no, I can share the screen. It's just not letting me pull up what I want to pull up. I'm going to share this document with everybody afterwards.
Okay, I think that's way better, yeah.
What it says is basically that no fat is purely one type of fat. Every fat has a percentage of saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, and polyunsaturated fat in it. Now we learned
Mikhail, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Maybe you just need to stop sharing the screen.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, not a problem.
Oh, hang on.
At the top, there must be a stop sharing or some such option.
Yes, I'm trying.
Sorry, guys.
Oh my goodness. This is what happens when you're older and technologically challenged. Crazy. Okay. So, so all fats are slightly different. And they all contain different amounts. Now, where the majority of the fat comes from is what we call the fat. And we've learned that saturated fats are the most stable. So often they can be heated the highest. Although some of the man-made polyunsaturated fats, again, because of their manipulation, can be heated relatively high. Now, the smoke point of a fat will tell you at what temperature it starts to smoke, or at what temperature, in theory, it's going to catch on fire, which isn't good. None of us want a fire. None of us want a fat fire. And we definitely would not want to reuse an oil that has burnt. However, consistently and constantly heating the same fat, no matter how stable or good of a fat it is, over and over again to just below its smoke point, is going to break that fat down and make it unhealthy. So one of the biggest things about cooking oils is no matter the smoke point, you're only going to use them once. Reusing that cooking fat is not ideal. Now, I'm going to be working in Fahrenheit. Is that all right, Dr. Kopp?
That's okay. We can convert. In India, they use mostly centigrade. But
all right, I'll do my best to convert it. Now, coconut oil has a really nice high smoke point of around 200, 220 degrees centigrade. Butter or ghee, specifically ghee, is probably around 180. Okay. Now, the true palm oil, which isn't the palm oil, the processed palm oil that is now readily and cheaply available. True palm oil is red, and it definitely has a smell, not a bad smell, but it definitely has its own aroma to it. That has a really high smoke point as well, about the same as coconut oil. Now, of the predominantly monounsaturated fats, avocado oil is one of your best oils, one of your best naturally liquid oils to cook with, and its smoke point is around 250.
Oh, okay.
It's quite high. Wow. Now, extra virgin olive oil, many people have said use only in cold preparations, just for salad dressings and those types of things. And a real cold pressed olive oil, and that means that if you put your olive oil in the fridge, it actually goes milky. It goes almost solid. So check your olive oil. A real olive oil has a smoke point at around 160. So it actually works well for roasting once. It's not to put in your deep fat fryer to use over and over again, but it is fine for a one-time, not insanely high heat preparation. Then we come to the man-made oils, and we're looking, and they all have you'll notice they all have really high smoke points. And the reason that they do is because of the amount of trans fats in them already. The trans fats make them stable, and because many of the phytochemicals, the plant nutrients, have been removed from them. So peanut oil, you're looking at around 220. Rice bran oil, you're looking at around 200. Safflower oil, you're looking at around 250, I think. Sesame oil, which in my opinion, a cold pressed sesame oil does not work well for cooking, but a processed sesame oil, you're looking at around 220 again. Canola oil is around 190. Sunflower oil is around 200. The vegetable shortening, I forget the Indian name for it, that actually has the lowest smoking point of the bunch, and that's at around 160. And then you have the corn oil and the soybean oils, which again are around the 220s, and the grapeseed oil, which again is around 200. So you'll notice that a lot of these more unstable fats, or these man-made fats that are full of these toxic ingredients that become even more concentrated with heat and light, are promoted as fats to use for heat because they don't catch on fire. Not because they won't kill you, but because they won't cause a fire in your house. So I think it's more mindful and more important to look at, number one, of course, the manufacture of the oil, how the oil is made, the fatty acid composition of the oil. The more polyunsaturated fats the oil possesses or are contained in the oil, the more unstable the oil, the less you want to heat it, because the more likely it is to be damaged or oxidized. And lastly, you would look at that smoke point, as in how hot can I make it before it's going to catch on fire. And this opens up a whole other conversation about cooking temperatures and how hot or how fast we should be cooking our foods. And there's a lot of research on that as well. But that is for a whole other conversation. So just remember that with those man-made fats, so we're looking again, and I will repeat the names of all of them in case you guys have forgotten. So it's the commercially processed peanut oil, not the ground nut oil that was traditionally used, which was squeezed out of the nuts, but mass-produced peanut oil, rice bran oil, safflower oil, sesame seed oil, and again has been mass-produced, canola oil, sunflower oil, vegetable shortening or vegetable ghee, it can also be known as well, corn oil, soybean oil, and grapeseed oil. These all often seem to have a relatively good fatty acid profile, but the processing method of the fat itself negates their healthfulness. They are not recommended for consumption. They are not recommended for cold consumption, and they are definitely not recommended for warm consumption.
Okay, so supposing, Mikhail, someone was to ask me or you that I want to change my cooking oil, and I cook traditionally Indian food, and in Indian food that there's a lot of high heat cooking as well as sauteing as well, but a lot of high heat cooking. So what would you or I tell them? What is the best oil they could possibly use?
So I would look for a refined coconut oil, which doesn't have the smell of coconut oil, so you don't get that flavor that sometimes people find offensive.
Yeah.
If you can get an avocado oil, that would be great for stir frying or sauteing. Mm-hmm. And if you can get real ghee, and 100% real ghee, so check your ingredients, that would be very good for high heat cooking. Mustard oil works well for short high heat cooking.
Yeah.
And olive oil is fantastic again for short cooking, so for stir frying or for sauteing. Now, traditionally, as far as I know, and I might be incorrect, most methods of cooking are either a short period of time at high heat or a long period of time at moderate to low heat.
Yeah.
Now, in our modern world, because more is better, we tend to often do long period of time at high heat. Think, deep fat frying things 3 or 4 or 5 times to make them extra crispy. That's not necessarily an ideal cooking method. So as well as looking at the oils that we're using to cook with, look at our method. If you are doing a lot of deep frying, even deep frying in coconut oil is eventually going to produce some level of damaged fat. So, and traditionally, I don't think a meal was made up of a whole bunch of deep fried food and maybe a little bit of rice.
Yeah, you're right.
stewed or sauteed or stir-fried food with maybe a deep-fried option as a side. So the way that we compose our plates has changed, and we need to look at that when we're looking at our cooking oils and our cooking methods.
So, Michal, maybe a few words about canola oil, because that is so common in Canada.
Yes, so canola oil is also known as rapeseed oil, and the reason it is not marketed as rapeseed oil is because I wouldn't buy something called rapeseed, and I doubt you would either. And canola is actually a Canadian product. Yeah. It is named canola because it's Canada #1 oil. Mm-hmm. That's what it stands for. And it is the byproduct of canola farming, which became very popular to fuel engines and to fuel the machinery of World War II. So there needed to be something done with this oil, and with the dyed hot hypothesis that came out, canola oil on paper looks really good. It's got a high smoke point, and it's full of polyunsaturated, and I say this in air quotes, people, heart healthy fats. And so it became highly marketed as your ideal fat for consumption. And that means fat for eating cold and warm. And nothing could be further from the truth. Canola oil is one of the most highly processed oils that you could purchase. All you need to do is go to YouTube and look up how canola oil is made to see the 11-step process that is done with it. It is finally washed with hexane to get rid of the awful, awful smell. And if any of you ever come to Canada, and if you ever come to Alberta, which is the province where I live, where they grow lots and lots of canola, you see the yellow canola fields for miles, it does not smell good. Canola is not a good smelling thing. And we all know that our taste begins with our noses. And not only does the processing make the oil, does it damage the oil, but the residual smell is nasty. And it's washed with hexane to remove the smell. It is then placed in a thin plastic container, because that's how these oils are sold, and put on trucks and put on the shelves under the bright lights in the grocery store. So if the processing itself hasn't damaged the oil, sitting in the grocery store under the heat and the light for months and months and months on end is damaging it for sure. Sadly, and I think this happens in India as well, is that all the restaurants and all the fast food joints and all the food trucks use canola oil. Number one, here they're legally required to. It's the heart healthy oil. It has a high smoke point. It's not going to catch on fire. It's the oil to put in your deep fat fryer. So when you go out to eat, that is one thing you can never, ever avoid. So often I tell my clients, and I know you must tell your patients, if you are choosing to go out to eat, then just deal with that, walk away, and make sure that you're eating really healthy before and doing a lot of stuff to detoxify and take your antioxidants afterwards. But those things are prolific, and they're everywhere. And in the deep fat fryers, they use them over and over again because they're cheap, and because they don't smell, and because they don't burn. But doesn't mean that they're going to not clog up your arteries and stick and rust you from the inside out. And I don't know, do the folks in India use a lot of cooking sprays?
No, not really.
Okay, that's wonderful. That is an absolute wonderful thing. If they ever get introduced, don't even listen to the commercials on TV, because that's hydrogenated fat in a can. It's even worse than cheese in a can. Don't get it either, but it's unpleasant stuff.
Okay, so in conclusion, it's much better to use your traditional oil that your grandparents were probably using, and avoid the man-made oils that Michal was telling us about, and be aware of the trans fats. So if you're eating outside, it is very likely that you're getting a very high dose of trans fat. So it's much better that you eat at home. And actually eating at home and cooking together as a family is a lot of fun. And so trans fats are the fats to avoid, and preferably go back to the traditional oil that you were using, And again, it depends on which part of the country in India you're from and what particular food you're using it for. Something like ghee can be such a wonderful flavor, right, Mikhail?
It is, and as you were saying that, I was thinking that as a traditional, if we think of traditional foods or fats that you should be using, if the fat itself has a flavor, so it might be a flavor that you like, or it might be a flavor that you don't, or it might match with your meal, or it might not. But if your traditional fat has a flavor, or if your fat that you're using, not just traditional, has a flavor, that's a good fat to use. Because all of the man-made fats, all of them are devoid of odor. They've all had their smell taken away. So find the fat that matches with your meal. It might take a little bit of experimentation. It might mean asking some of your grandparents if they are still around, or looking at some old cookbooks to see what they use traditionally for those dishes. But experiment. I think your taste buds will thank you, and your body and your heart will definitely thank you in the long run.
Mikhail, just last few comments is for people in North America. What would you say about using bacon fat or duck fat or any of those for cooking?
So the same way that it's very common knowledge that we store our toxins in our fats, animals do the same. And just as it is important to know where your non-animal product fats are coming from, it is as important, if not more important, to know where your animal fats are coming from. Healthy animals produce unbelievably healthy fats, really high saturated fat content, really good for high heat cooking once, not over and over again. So if you tend to render your bacon fat, bacon tends to be cooked best over a long period of time on a lower heat. You'll get the fat from that. You can use it once again to cook with. Duck fat as well. When you render fat, it's done over a low heat for a long period of time. That fat is wonderfully flavorful. Again, it has a taste and a flavor, so it's good to use. So good stuff to cook with. But again, and high smoke points. You're looking at smoke points in around the 200s or the 400 mark for North Americans. But it's really important, number one, where did the fat come from? So pigs that are unhealthy or unhappy or haven't eaten what pigs are meant to eat, ducks that have been force-fed corn and soy, cows which make tallow, which have been fed grains and soy rather than grass. Not good fats. As with ghee, right? Ghee originally comes from a cow. You want a healthy cow. The healthy cow will make healthy milk fat. So same applies. It's no different where you live. The basic premise is the same. Naturally occurring is always going to be better for you than something that we have tried to manipulate. We are not smarter than that. Sadly, we are not smarter than nature.
Okay, thank you, Mikhail. That was wonderful catching up, and more later. So bye now.
Thanks, Dr. Carr. Bye, everyone.
Bye.